Welcome on into Author Insights with Jake Lynch. This is the video podcast where we discuss the behind the scenes and inside the mind of Jake Lynch's book. This is episode number 2 of 10 episodes coming your way for each part of Jake's newest book, Broken to Beautiful, a story about a teenage girl going through tragedy and suicidal thoughts, how she finds God, how her relationship with God transformed her and the people around her, going from broken to beautiful. You can buy this book on Amazon and Kindle or paperback version, and the audiobook, big news, comes out this May, just 1 month on Audible. Really looking forward to that. That's going to be fantastic. I've already heard some snippets, and it's good. But everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Troy Lynch. I'm joined by my brother, the author himself, Jake Lynch. Jake, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, brother. Always love being here.
Again, this was your idea. Anyway, so part 2. Last week we talked about part 1, but this part 2, this is the truth. All right. So the first part, we start off hot and heavy. Crystal suffers depression, loneliness. Her mother trying to drive to pick her up from a terrible winter formal experience, getting hit by a truck while she's in the car. We don't know what happens with her. Part 2 is the truth. And I believe it picks up right after Crystal tried to commit suicide. And she wakes up, I believe, in the hospital. So let's just kind of take people. You're waking up in the hospital. You're thinking you should be dead, but you're not dead. So what's the premise of this next chapter?
Yeah, so it starts off with the feel of rock bottom. Like Crystal has hit rock bottom, and I wanted to like give that like feeling to the reader in a sense, like, well, like what's like a sense of rock bottom for people? Waking up into a hospital. And what's even worse is after Crystal tried to commit her own suicide in a sense. So it's just that point where you get to that like sense of fatigue, like both physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, that you just hit the low so much and you're just like, can I even get back up? And you like have to figure out how to pick yourself back up and put yourself back together and move on from this sort of experience. So I started off, pretty low, but this is also the beginning point for the rest of the story, for where the story really starts to take off.
I want to see if I can find the quote that we start this next part. The quote is by you, Jake, and it says, "Everyone hits a low point in their life. The question is, will you get back up?" So I'm curious, once Crystal got back up, was she glad she was still alive, or was she kind of disappointed?
I feel like she felt neither in a sense. Like she definitely was not glad, but she wasn't like disappointed entirely. Like I can like agree that she felt some sense of disappointment just because she's like, I tried it, I tried to end it and it didn't work. But she's so tired that she just accepts it and move on. She's like, okay, that didn't work. What now? Essentially. So she's more of like, what do I do now in this sense? Because she doesn't have her mom now. And she has to make her own decisions and, start thinking more for herself in this sense. And it's like, it's a very, like, she has to grow up very fast after that kind of experience. And it's not nice to her.
That wasn't the first time that Crystal tried to commit suicide, right?
No, it was.
It
That
was
was
the
the
first
first.
time. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember there was some sort of like, it's been this many days until I've had
Yeah.
suicidal thoughts or something.
Yeah, that was it kept that whiteboard was like the number of days that she's wanted to commit suicide, not the number of days that she's tried to commit suicide. So it's like, oh, I've had these thoughts for this long. And I put that in the first chapter just to, set the tone for the character of like, she's starting off low.
Starting off low. And you also made her really think about it. Like, her mom being a nurse, she knew what artery she wanted to kind of cut. Like, why did you want to get detailed in that?
I like adding detail. essentially. I'm like, oh, she just cut her wrist. I'm like, okay, well, you can cut your, like, where exactly? And then the fact that I made the mom a nurse, like, had a sense of logic to it. Like, oh, well, if her mom's a nurse, then her mom would have probably talked some medical practice to her. And so then that, Crystal would have learned some stuff about it. I'm like, oh, so she knows where the radial artery is, and she would know where to cut exactly.
All
So
right, well, we can move on.
yeah,
So
let's
I want to
like,
move. I want to move on to like the first bit of hope that we actually see, and you introduce this character, which I believe this is like the only part this character appears in the book, but it leaves this lasting impact on
mhm.
Crystal. It's this janitor. We don't even know his name, but he leaves these brownies. Why did you make this character so influential?
The janitor represents the like person who's there for you in your lowest moment, essentially. And when you are a person who's been hurting for so long, especially going through like you can be going through any, difficulty in life. It doesn't have to be depression, but when you've been hurting for so long, you know, you really crave connection and people to reach out to you. And just the simple act of someone asking, are you okay? And just showing just a little bit of love to someone by asking, are you okay? That can change a person's world essentially. And so that's what this was. Like this encounter with this janitor is that, are you okay? Essentially. And it changes Crystal's world because from her standpoint, she's never had anyone ask her that question. She's never had anyone care about her. And so to have a stranger show her that kindness is like a little proof that like there is hope. It's not all depressing. And so it plants the seed that sprouts the rest of the story.
Yeah. I love how it's just some random person. And, I guess, from societal standards, a janitor is like the lowest of the low when it comes to a business or something like that. But I love this because you could be anybody in any position and you can make this kind of an impact on somebody where it can change somebody's trajectory on life. And so he does this he doesn't know who Crystal is. He's not some creeper. But he just leaves brownies, like a hot steaming brownie for Crystal whenever she wakes up. And oh my gosh, like that's the best comfort food, brownies, right? So
They are.
why did you choose brownies? And why did he want to do something like this?
Brownies are my favorite.
Brownies
That's why.
are.
Yes.
You want to change your life, you eat brownies.
They have nothing in them, just sugar.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, you should try Jenna's gluten-free brownies. They're pretty amazing. But
I
yeah.
Ooh.
So why did the janitor want to do this?
It's like I said, it's those small acts of kindness that mean the most to people. And like that kind of generosity is rare these days to where you have a stranger who actually looks out for people's interests and is like, oh, because like Crystal doesn't see this from her perspective, but from the janitor's perspective, like he probably saw her and she looked, sad and depressed and tired. And so, just that tiny thought of like, I should do this for that person. And then he went and did a small act of kindness to her. And that changes worlds, that moves mountains. It's that small act of love that most people don't really do, actually. You're like, nah, I'm too busy. I got some work to do. It's like when you stop and pay attention to the people around you, that's when you're really loving them.
Yeah, but so he's a Christian, and
Yes.
this was probably like the first Christian interaction that Crystal had, and it was mind blowing to her because there was this scene where he was actually listening to Crystal, and he asked, why did you try to kill yourself? And she was mad, upset, all the other emotions, and actually opened up to him. And he didn't judge, he just felt sorry. Was there anybody in your life that you kind of resonate with when it comes to like, oh, the janitor was this person in my life?
Um, there isn't anyone in particular that I base the janitor off of in that manner. It's more of like he embodies that person or represents that person who sits there and listens to you. Like they don't try to offer you advice.
Right.
They're just that person who is there to listen. And sometimes that's the best medicine that people need because people need to talk, people need to open up. And for Crystal's standpoint, she doesn't talk. She doesn't have anyone to talk to. So it just all bundles up inside. So she needs someone who will just listen to her. And so like I just remember like being back in high school, I'm like, I don't talk that much. Like I ask people, like I can ask people questions, but when someone asks me a question out of the blue, that shows that they care about me. And so I always felt a lot more joy when people asked me a question, be like, no, 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 I want to hear how you're doing. And that's real love in action right there. And so Crystal is feeling that real love for the first time from a stranger.
That's awesome. I think it goes to show just anybody can be like the janitor. It
Yeah.
doesn't take much, just a little bit, but it can really change somebody's life. But you talk about something that people need to try to feel better. Obviously, counseling is one of those things that everybody's like, well, if
Oh, yeah.
you're feeling bad or you're in trouble, have you tried counseling or have you tried therapy? So
Yeah.
Crystal tries counseling, or I guess is forced into counseling just based off of what happened and how she tried to take her own life, but it doesn't go well.
Right. And for full disclaimer, like I just want to say, like, it may look like I'm like I don't agree with counseling or anything in this story, but that's the furthest from the truth. Like
Mom was a
I'm
counselor.
That's true. That's true. She did do
Yeah.
that for a little bit. Like the point of the story and what I'm trying to say is like, I'm not saying counseling is bad. In fact, people should get counseling and people should get therapy because it is important and it like probably does work. But the like what I'm targeting more is that counseling and therapy won't solve every problem because Crystal's not just dealing with only a depression problem. She's dealing with a spiritual problem too, that emptiness that she feels inside herself. Like a counselor is not going to solve that by telling you how to rethink your perspective. So like that's what it targets more. So like, and that's why Crystal lashes out at her counselor, essentially. So
Well, the
it's not,
counselor, Karen, was kind of
oh
an
my
airhead.
gosh. Oh yeah, she was an airhead. And that was kind of funny to write it because like, first of all, her name is Karen. And what was super funny is that I wrote her before the word Karen even was the word Karen.
You don't
You
want to be a
know,
Karen.
you don't want to be a Karen. And so I'm like, oh wow, like that just happened over time. And yeah, like and I made the counselor be an airhead, but it's like what happens when this person just doesn't get it? They just don't understand what you're going through. And like you're forced to sit through a suicidal clinic is like, do you think these people really want to talk about this to an airhead like you? Is like, no, I don't like you. I don't trust you. And then it's like, oh, you should do this. And I'm like, I don't like you.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
No,
Um, so obviously, crystal and counseling not necessarily going hand in hand.
right.
Um, and obviously, for everybody in different positions, um, counseling can help. Absolutely. Like our
Yeah,
mom was a
it is
church
important.
counselor for a long time, and there was great change that she got to help other people go through.
Yeah,
But Crystal's in a very extreme position. But I think one of the first people. So Crystal starts to ask questions, right? And I believe that at this point she get involved in a Bible study or something like that, or she goes to church. I just want to kind of, how does she meet Dana Romero, and why was Dana so important?
yeah. So like once Crystal gets out of the clinic, she like, is like, well, what am I like? I feel like I'm searching for something, but I don't know what. And that leads her to meeting Carmen, Jamie's
Right.
sister, and then going to Bible study and then to the church. And then she meets Dana Romero. So in the chapters after the clinic, it's talking about Crystal's journey of like asking these questions like, oh, what is life really about? Like, is there a God essentially? And so by the time that Crystal meets Dana, she's like gone to church and she's wondering like, is this real or not? Essentially, like because it could all be a lie. And Crystal has that personality of like this could all be a cult, you
Yeah,
know?
she said that multiple times.
Exactly. And so when she meets Dana, she meets a relatable character essentially. And like she asks her, like, how do you know this is real? And that's a very important question to ask someone about their faith, essentially, because what they tell you is going to affect how you perceive their religion, essentially. And Dana's a very relatable character because, like turns out that she had a lot of cuts on her stomach from her times in high school and that she was a raging alcoholic a lot. And so it's that sense of relation from Crystal to Dana that helps kind of like guide her in the right direction of where to go with her path and be like, is this real or is it all just a hoax, essentially? So I love their discussions and what they talk about.
Yeah. So Crystal was told by this younger girl that she kind of shared a hospital room with, I don't
Right.
know, try church. If you have questions about why we're on earth, why we're living, if we have purpose, try church. And I can't think that kind of sparks everything. So for this whole part two, it's called The Truth because that's exactly what Crystal is searching for. And so we kind of hinted a little bit with Dana Romero, and Crystal met her, had some questions. But during this part of the book, it was going to church, uh, listening to pastor's sermons, meeting Dana Romero. You know, we talked a little bit in the last episode, just kind of how you wanted to put from beginning to present day, how somebody with doubts or is on the opposite side of the spectrum when it comes to religion finds Christianity. So this overall search embodies a lot. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of information. If you ever have any questions, this is a good book to go to. Even though it's fictional, this is all real life. Why did you decide to do that?
I thought about it and I'm like, I could give Crystal the instant conversion scene, and that could happen. But the more I started writing it, I'm like, no, like people don't just like wake up the next day and be like, I'm gonna be a Christian. I'm
Right.
just like, no. I started to realize as I was writing it that there has to be a buildup and that you have to gradually like get people to the right place to where they'll be more open to something. Like sometimes a character has to go through a whole journey so that their mindset changes in a way to where they will like make a decision because like if you took a character from the very beginning and like how to make that decision later, they would have been like, no, I'm not going to do this. I don't believe in this or whatever. But it's like once you go through the journey and kind of soften them up a little bit, that's when they're more willing and be like, okay, yeah, I think I'll make that decision this time because I learned, because I got humbled through that journey.
And it takes a little bit. And I love how you kind of had this be a slow burn because I feel like if it was just like, oh, she went to one church sermon and was like, boom, I believe in God. That doesn't happen all the time. It can happen. We've seen it before, but this is a much more real and let's dig down into the deep raw emotions of it. Do we actually think this is a cult? Let's challenge what we actually believe in. And that's tough because you have to break down your own barriers because you already have your preconceived notions of, you know, how the world works. Maybe you've never really thought about it, but this really kind of challenges you. And I love the struggle that Crystal kind of goes with it because she's like, okay, that made sense, but like at the same time, I'm still a little reserved about that. I don't know if that played a factor when you were kind of trying to find similar answers.
Mhm. For me personally, it wasn't like my personal journey was not like Crystal's. at least not initially. I mean, sure, like some of the questions that she started asking were the questions that I asked myself when I was growing up, but I was also a lot younger than Crystal and I was going to church a lot. So, but like one of the ways that mirrors from my personal experience to Crystal's is the when she's reading the Genesis portions. And because she started reading the Bible from the beginning, like Genesis, and that's what I did. I actually didn't start reading the New Testament about Jesus. I started reading the Old Testament. Like my first thing is like in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So I start from the creationist point of view and build from there and be like, we learn about this world before we can like to understand how Christianity works. And since I was writing this for the like I wrote this book for people who don't understand Christianity. And so I can't just have Crystal go through the instant conversion. I have to build the gradual build because you're not going to understand the test if you don't study for it, essentially. So that's what I had to do. I had to slowly build up through it. And so my personal life wasn't as dramatic as Crystal's, essentially, but the questions were still there because the more I started reading the Bible when I was young, that's when the more questions I started asking, like, oh, like, why do we only live to be 100 years old? Uh, why is the world broken? Where did the world come from? Where did we come from? You know, it's like, oh, I came from my parents. Where did they come from? They came from their parents, and et cetera, et cetera.
That's really interesting. And I like during the process, you mentioned Bible study. I think if you go to any large church, any church, they'll encourage Bible study.
Oh
So you
yeah.
get into a small group, you try to, become friends with them, you read the Bible. But for Crystal, it's like a blessing and a curse for her. And I know from your personal experience, that's about the same.
Yeah, yeah. When I was, I mean, Crystal joins this Bible study and she gets to meet Summer for the first time. We're like, oh, hi. And then she realizes the popular person is not who she imagined at all. But yet she still wants to be friends with this person. And, like they still go to the same church technically. And so, yeah, like there were some times when I like went to Bible studies and I wanted to be friends with some people, but, it didn't always go well. I'll say, I'll say.
Right. But I mean, it's tough because Christians are broken people too. Christians aren't perfect, but you look at people who are Christians and they set a very high standard for themselves when it comes to morality, and being genuine and kind. But that doesn't mean everyone is.
Yeah.
Uh, and I know, from my personal experience, I mean, you go to any church and there's maybe people you don't necessarily like. Um, so I love how, Crystal is going to this Bible study. She wants to learn about Jesus and also create these genuine relationships with other people, but it's hard. Like, why did Crystal kind of stick with it? Because there were a lot of people she wanted to be friends with, but she knew were treating her poorly. Why did she do that?
I don't think she fully knew why she was there, but she felt like she was onto something that she was searching for. Like, this feels like it's right, essentially. And so she stuck with it, like, not so much for the friendship sense, at least not in the beginning. And she was on her journey, her own personal journey of self-discovery for that. So the friendship part was difficult, and that added more to the loneliness. Like she joins a Bible study, and even then she still doesn't fit in. And because that still shows some drama even within the Christian community. But yeah, like she's still searching for something at this point, and she doesn't fully know why, but she sticks around with it.
And she sticks with it up until she reads Mark 5:34. And that's about the bleeding woman. And if you're not familiar with the bleeding woman, well, you probably are if you already read the book. But this woman who's been bleeding literally her entire life, and she sees Jesus in a crowd and just knows that if she's able to touch Jesus or touch Jesus's robes, that she could be cured. It wasn't like a guarantee, but she really had the faith that that would happen. So in the actual story in the Bible, she touches Jesus's robe, I believe, Jake, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and she was instantly healed. this changed Crystal's life, and this is where she became a Christian, I believe. So why was that? Why was that the verse or the part of the Bible that you wanted to be so impactful to Crystal?
Um, it comes a little bit with the plot and the symbolism of the bleeding woman to Crystal, essentially, because when Crystal sliced her wrist, her wound actually never fully healed. And so I reference that a little bit in this like part of the book to where Crystal's bleeding starts like comes back every now and then whenever she's like too emotionally stressed. And so she has a bleeding problem herself and she tries to hide it. And I was reading this passage when I was like still in college, and I read the passage of the bleeding woman and how this woman suffered from extreme social isolation because of her bleeding problem. Because, back then there were a lot more purity laws, and if they touched her, they would be deemed, impure. And so the relation between Crystal and the bleeding woman was so distinct and similar that I read that passage and I'm like, I have to put this in here because she relates directly to Crystal. She's a woman who's been isolated and ostracized her entire life, has had a bleeding problem for 12 years or something. And Crystal instantly relates to her, a biblical character. And so that's one of the tipping points for Crystal because, Crystal goes through this whole process of hearing about Jesus, learning about God, reading the Bible, but it's that relation to that biblical character, to that bleeding woman that finally brings her over and being like, if this woman can be healed, then I can be healed too. And that's when Crystal finally makes the decision to give her life to Christ. And when she does that, she wakes up and her wound is fully healed and she
That's
can
cool.
feel happy again. And she's like, oh my gosh, it's real. It's real.
Right. When you was there like a passage in the Bible that kind of helped you come out from the other side of depression and loneliness?
Um, Nothing, no, like I don't have any distinct Bible verse essentially. I mean, I have a song in my head, like made by Danny Goki called Tell Your Heart to Beat Again. That kind of helped me the most when I was in that time. But I'm just like, I didn't take the time to memorize any Psalms, even though I'm sure there are a lot of Psalms that can relate to depression and stuff like that. But I didn't memorize any Psalms or Bible verses
Yeah.
in particular.
Sometimes it's not just one verse, it's just like a culmination. Um, and so I think that's awesome. Like at the same time, hold on, let me exit that. Because everybody's situation is different. And I love that Crystal read that was like, wow, that is me. So
Mhm.
how long of a time span did she go from asking the first questions of like, what is the purpose of life? Why are we here, to giving her life to Christ?
Yeah, like I had to, like, it was such a hassle in writing it because, making a timeline, you have to be so strict about it and remember things. Uh, Correct, like I might be wrong in this. I think the time between Crystal going from the hospital to making her first decision, like that might have been, I'd say like 3 to 4 months, maybe longer,
Yeah.
because when she starts becoming friends with Jamie later, that like it's a new school year by that time. So I think it happened like it could be 3 to maybe 6 months in that time. So, it takes some time for this stuff to happen.
I mean, it's a lot of information. It's a lot of resetting. It's a lot. It's just a
It is
lot.
a lot.
Any big decision like that, I would hope would take some time. I know it's amazing and it's a total miracle if it can happen, like that. And some people
Yeah.
can just feel it. But I love it. I love that journey. And that's only through the first two parts. So Crystal goes through a lot within the first two parts, going from tragedy and then just trying to find the purpose of life.
Mhm.
eventually figuring out what Jesus is, giving her life to Jesus. And now, part 3 that we're going to get into next week, that's called friendship. So, will Crystal be able to make friends, and how does her life actually physically, maybe mentally, and spiritually change now that she has Jesus a part of her life? It doesn't mean things are easier, but at least, Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, she kind of has an idea of what to do next.
That is exactly correct. That's exactly correct. Now that she has found, like, her purpose for living and like the hope to, breathe again, we then started dealing with the high schooler problems now. So like I had to I have to build her up, one step at a time as this journey goes on, because it's like you can't deal with the friendship problem unless you deal with the depression problem, and we can't deal with that until you deal with the hope problem, you can do the Jesus problem. So you have to build it up gradually. And so it's one problem at a time, one, part at a time. And that's why each part is unique in this story, because they target something different.
And Jesus talked about in the Bible how it's not great for man to be alone. Obviously, that can mean, with a wife, with a husband, with friends, and I love this next part. Because obviously whatever Crystal was trying to do in the first place, it wasn't necessarily working for her. So yeah, and making friends is hard, and especially getting uncomfortable and trying to do that. So I'm really looking forward to the next part. Jake, do we have any closing thoughts on part 2, the truth, before we have to wrap up?
I just want to say this book is meant for people who are going through these questions, and it's very relatable to a lot of people who are asking these types of questions. And so it's almost like a roadmap of like, okay, if you're here, then try going here and like asking these questions, going to this church, and just try it out for yourself. Go on your own journey of discovery to see, is this legit or not? And if it's true, then it's the greatest truth of all time. But if it's a lie, then it's the greatest lie of all time.
Yeah, no, I think for both of us, like I said, I think in the first episode, I really challenged my faith when it came to when I was in college. And I'm so glad I did. So many answers, so much evidence. I was in that point where I was like, maybe it is a lie. Maybe Jesus is like Santa, or God is like the Easter Bunny. And if I'm breaking that news to you, I'm sorry. But become an adult. What are you doing? But it's incredibly enlightening, and it will change your life. And I think it's absolutely amazing. Guys, before we wrap up, just a couple more announcements. The Lost Saint comes out this summer. The Chronicles. There's multiple books of Marcus, the Lost Saint. I've already read the first draft. I can't wait for this next book to come out. And it is coming out this summer. But next month, we are getting the Audible version of Broken to Beautiful. And of course, you can always buy Broken to Beautiful in paperback version or on Kindle. And you can always find that on Amazon. But guys, thank you so much again for watching and listening to Author Insights with Jake Lynch. So excited that you were with us for part 2, but part 3, friendship, that comes up next week.